Have you ever wondered how music can bring back lost memories and mend broken bonds? Experience the journey of Emily, who discovers the transformative power of an old violin in her grandfather George's life. It was a gray day when Emily arrived at her grandfather George's old country house. The car's wheels squeaked on the wet gravel of the driveway, announcing her arrival. Mary, a lady with silver hair and a kind face, waited at the door. Her warm smile offered a comforting contrast to the gloomy atmosphere. "Emily, dear, it's so good to see you," said Mary, embracing her. The young woman returned the hug, feeling a mix of joy and nervousness. Mary led Emily to the living room, where George sat in a worn armchair, staring out the window. His eyes seemed focused on something distant, lost in thoughts or memories that only he could see. "Grandpa, it's me, Emily," she said, approaching slowly. George turned slowly, his face weathered by time, showing a look of confusion. He furrowed his brow, trying to recognize the voice calling his name, but without success. "Who are you?" he asked, his frail voice barely breaking the silence of the room. The words hit Emily like a stone. Tears welled up in her eyes as she tried to grasp his hand, looking for some sign of recognition. "It's Emily, your granddaughter," she tried again, her voice choked with emotion. George looked at their clasped hands and then at Mary, still puzzled. Mary put her hand on Emily's shoulder, whispering, "He has good days and bad days, dear. His illness, sometimes he gets lost." Emily nodded, wiping away a tear that rolled down her cheek. "I know, I hoped today would be a good day." "He will recognize you, Emily. He just needs time," Mary tried to console her, with a faith that seemed to shake Emily's own uncertainties. Taking a deep breath, Emily sat next to George, holding his hand gently. "I'll stay here with you, Grandpa. We'll spend some time together," she said, more to herself than to him, seeking the courage to face the day and whatever it would bring. Emily persuaded Mary to take George out for a stroll, looking for a way to connect with her grandfather. The day was clear and crisp, perfect for a walk through the streets of the small town center. Mary, attentive, helped George walk, while Emily looked around, trying to find something that might spark her grandfather's interest. Arriving at the local bazaar, the trio wandered among the stalls of antiques and crafts. George, usually quiet and distant, suddenly stopped, his eyes fixed on an item on a vendor's table, an old violin with some signs of wear, but still beautiful. He approached almost impulsively, and without a word, picked up the violin. Mary and Emily exchanged looks of surprise and caution. George ran his fingers over the worn wood of the violin, as if he recognized every curve and scratch. With Emily's help, he positioned the violin and began to play. The first notes were uncertain and hesitant, but soon the music flowed more clearly and confidently. George's expression completely transformed. His eyes, previously clouded by confusion, now shone with a forgotten vivacity. Each note he played seemed to bring to light pieces of a life filled with music and passion which had been temporarily obscured. Mary stood by, watching everything with a mix of shock and admiration, while Emily felt tears welling up in her eyes. The impact of the music was palpable, and the transformation in George, though temporary, was deeply moving. Around them, other people at the bazaar began to notice the scene, drawn by the melody of the violin. Some stopped to listen, others smiled at the evident joy on George's face. The atmosphere in the bazaar changed, as if everyone shared for a moment the same memory and oblivion. Emily watched, amazed and hopeful, as her grandfather rediscovered a piece of himself through the music. In that brief moment, the violin was not just an instrument, but a key to the lost corners of George's mind. As the old violin resonates through the bazaar, George briefly closes his eyes, allowing each note guided by his trembling hands to reclaim fragments of a forgotten life. The music intertwines with the afternoon air, capturing the attention of everyone around, but especially Emily and Mary, who watch with tear-filled eyes. "Each note I play reminds me of Sarah," George murmurs, his words flowing with the music. He pauses, sighing deeply as his memory navigates the past. "It was spring, and Sarah wore a yellow dress. We danced under the stars to the sound of a violin. Very much like this one," he recounts, his voice choked with emotion. Emily, by his side, holds Mary's hand, feeling the weight of stories she had never heard. The tales of love, youth, and shared dreams weave a tapestry of emotions, each more vibrant and poignant than the last. "He never talked much about her after she was gone," whispers Mary to Emily, sadness mixed with admiration in her tone. As George continues, the fragments of memory become clearer and more detailed. He describes Sarah, her smile, and the happy days they spent together. "She loved music more than anything," he says, a weak smile forming on his face. "Music connected us, just as it connects us now, Emily." The revelation causes Emily to grip Mary's hand tighter. The music and George's stories create an invisible yet tangible link between the present and the past, between granddaughter and grandfather. Amid the melancholy of the music, a sense of closeness and understanding forms, subtle yet powerfully, among the three. In the background, the sun begins to set, bathing the bazaar in golden hues. George's music slows, each note resonating with more depth, more meaning. The people around stop to listen, some wiping away tears, others simply closing their eyes to better absorb the sad yet hopeful beauty of the melody flowing from an old violin played by hands that had almost forgotten what it feels like to be alive. As the music ends, a respectful silence settles. George looks at Emily, his eyes shining with a mix of nostalgia and gratitude. "Thank you," he says simply, his voice steady despite the emotional tremor. Emily smiles, her heart filled with a new understanding and renewed love for her grandfather. The music had brought George back, even if just for a moment, and this gift was more precious than words could express. Feeling a mix of nervousness and excitement, Emily picked up the violin that the bazaar had kindly lent her. Encouraged by her grandfather when she was a child, she had studied violin. Positioning herself beside George, she played the first hesitant notes of a simple melody. George, with the violin already in hand, stopped, looked at Emily, and a glimmer of recognition shone in his eyes. He joined in, harmonizing his notes with hers in an almost magical way. The music flowed between them, creating an invisible bridge that seemed to bring George back to reality, even if just for moments. His bow glided with a precision that contradicted his condition, and each note they played together seemed to strengthen their bond. Mary, watching from the side, wiped away a tear seeing the interaction between granddaughter and grandfather. As the music grew, so did the emotion and connection. Emily felt a wave of relief and joy seeing her grandfather so engaged, responding to the music and to her. In a moment of pause, George placed his hand over Emily's and said clearly, "You play well, dear." The words were simple, but loaded with meaning, confirming that he recognized her, at least in that moment. They finished the duet with exchanged glances that spoke more than words could express. The music had brought her grandfather back to her, even if temporarily, and this filled Emily's heart with renewed hope and love. With the end of the music, they embraced, a hug that sealed a moment of genuine and deep connection, a small miracle amid adversity. The sun was setting as Emily, George, and Mary made their way back to the bazaar. The street was quieter now, with most of the stalls closing. George held the old violin with reverent gentleness, touching the aged wood with trembling fingers. As they reached the stall from where they had borrowed the instrument, a man with a friendly face awaited them. Emily helped George return the violin. The man watched the scene with a shy smile, clearly moved by the respect and emotion that surrounded this simple act of return. George looked at Emily and, with surprising clarity, said, "Thank you, dear." It was the first time that day he had addressed her by the true affectionate bond they shared, recognizing her not just as a visitor, but as his granddaughter. Tears sprang to Emily's eyes, and she held George's hand firmly. "I promise, Grandpa, that music will continue to be part of our lives. I will learn to play the violin, and every time I come to visit, we will play together. It will be our little concert." Mary, standing by their side, discreetly wiped away a tear, witnessing the promise that brought new hope. George nodded, smiling, his gesture full of gratitude and love. As they walked to the car, Emily felt a mix of sadness and hope. She knew the days were uncertain and that her grandfather's memory might fail again, but that moment of recognition was a precious gift. She turned back one last time to look at the bazaar, the place where a simple violin had rekindled the flame of memory and love in her grandfather. With a heavy heart but a hopeful spirit, Emily knew that music had the power not only to heal, but to unite. After spending a few days with George, Emily returned home. A few weeks later, George passed away due to Alzheimer's disease. Since then, Emily resumed studying the violin, and whenever she plays the instrument, she remembers her grandfather. All the music is to celebrate his memory and his love. If you were touched by this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and give this video a like. Your comments and suggestions are very important to us and help us continue to bring content that moves and inspires. Share your opinion and tell us what else you would like to see here.